And so taking all of that knowledge and tooling around with it, we developed the next iteration of the Bee Lab, which is much more field-based and is much more about contributing our localized data into broader efforts to understand native bee populations.
From the Oregon State University Extension Service, this is Pollination, a podcast that tells the stories of researchers, land managers, and people like you who are making bold strides to improve the health of pollinators. I'm your host, Dr. Adoni Malathopoulos, Associate Professor of Pollinator Health in the Department of Horticulture. Science has become a rather technical affair, and as a consequence, many people think of it as something that's done by specialists and is far beyond their grasp. My next guest doesn't think that's right. Sara Leon Guerrero is a One Tam Community Science Program Manager with the Golden Gate National Parks Conservancy, where she helps further their vision to address ecological data gaps, implement long-term monitoring, and provide formal and informal science education, and promote curiosity and participation in a wide range of audiences. Her happy place is spending time in the field and working with the public on the Tamalpais Bee Lab, Marin Wildlife Watch, and BioBlitzes. Most recently, these efforts resulted in the rediscovery of the San Francisco leafcutter bee, Trachusa gummifera, which is a rare and endemic species that hadn't been seen in Marin since 1977. In this episode, we hear about how One Tam structures its programs, and we have a far-ranging discussion on the frontiers of citizen and community science. So with that, let's breach the ivory tower this week on Pollination. Hi, Sara. Welcome to Pollination.
Thanks, Andoni. It's great to be here.
I'm so glad we met at the bee school here at Oregon State just a couple months ago, and I was so impressed with the span and scope of the programming that you're coordinating down in California. And I guess just to set things up, I think when we think about, the kinds of lands that you're coordinating volunteers on, we think about a state or federal or municipal parks, we often think that there's a core of professional biologists who are out there collecting reams of data. And, it maybe brings into question, what is the role of citizen scientists in this kind of work? Just to start things off, what do you think of that? What is the role in that kind of a context?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, I'm very fortunate because I get to work with 4 different land agencies within Marin County in my role as a community science program manager for a nonprofit that is actually the partner of the national parks, the Golden Gate National Parks Conservancy. So I get to work in lands that span federal, which includes like Muir Woods National Monument, the Golden Gate National Recreation Area, all managed by the National Park Service. I get to work in lands managed by California State Parks, the Marin Municipal Water District, also known as Marin Water, and Marin County Parks. So really working at every level that you talked about there. And each of those agencies do have biologists and ecologists working for them, but oftentimes their focus has to be very limited because, there's only so many hours in the day, there's only so many specialties, and they often have mandates from either federal, state, or local ordinances. They're required to look at specific species that are important because they're listed or threatened, or maybe have greater implications for management. And so that means, it's like, yes, they are collecting reams and reams of data that is wonderful and amazing, and these beautiful data sets and inform a lot of management. But, there are hundreds, if not thousands of other organisms within these landscapes that also, need some time and attention and have important critical data gaps that are missing around them. Some even as basic as, some natural history of like, where are they? What plants or other resources do they need to live their lives and thrive? And so I look at this and I think this is really kind of, it's the promise. And I also think we are living into this promise that, without community and citizen science, I honestly don't know how we're going to fill those data gaps. There are so many people out there recreating in the lands, enjoying it, whether it's camping, hiking, visiting out there with friends who could be collecting some really valuable data that, the professional scientists don't have time or are actually just where their focus is doesn't allow them to step into that work in the ways that they actually probably might want to. So this is really exciting because working with those ecologists and biologists at the agencies, I can help kind of glean what might be interesting to look at or what might be really important for them to know for the management of the lands, not just for ourselves as people who recreate in them, but also all the non-human organisms that, live and exist in these landscapes. And then how can I, help develop that program so that, the very interested members of the public, the non-professional scientists can come in and help fill that data gap. So that to me is, kind of that's the role and the promise and the future of community science within these parklands.
That's amazing, and I can totally picture that. You do see, a lot of these agencies have biologists, but they are very focused. They have, maybe the legislature or the federal government has them working on something specific, and even though they have the skill and tasks, they really don't have the time, or even their scope of work that's defined may not cover these things. But you have all these people enjoying these public lands that are out there and curious, and they become a real asset when starting to think about things that go beyond the current and present mandates. That's fascinating. Well, I guess I want to know a little bit more about the programming. Tell us a little bit about who the volunteers are, how they're recruited, and how do you sort of plug them into this work? I know, I think you and I have had conversations about this in the past. Oftentimes people have thought, well, oh, community and citizen scientists can do a very basic role and they're very good at that. But it strikes me that you've been able to push that envelope a little bit. Tell us about your programs.
Yeah. And it's hard to talk about my particular program without recognizing kind of the folks who have come before me. So within our organization, we actually have probably one of the longest running community science programs, at least in our state that I could think about. And that's the Golden Gate Raptor Observatory. And they have over 40 years engaging, hundreds of volunteers in collecting some of the highest quality raptor migration data out there, and that's available. So, I think that their initial work has really paved the way for our organization and our collaborative to step into, the veracity of community science data as like real scientific technical data in that way. And so, with that, our programs have evolved similarly in that, we have a few different programs that we run, not all pollinator related. I'll just mention them briefly, which are we have a mammal camera project called the Marin Wildlife Watch, which basically we put out remote sensing cameras that collect so much data, hundreds of thousands of photos a year. And our volunteers help us identify exactly what is in those photos. And
Amazing.
basically works with the raw data to get us into kind of the data section that then our ecologists and folks can then run the statistical analysis on. It's like they are helping us process and actually identify things within that. And then we also engage in a variety of bioblitzes that help inform data gaps for our broader forest health work. Because that's being on the West Coast, we're very preoccupied with forest health, particularly climate change and everything that's happening with fire regimes. So our collaborative has put out this really remarkable forest health strategy. And they also outline some very critical data gaps that are important for moving forward certain management practices. And the community science that we're doing is actually helping fill that data gaps that, they need in order to do some of that forest health work. So, and then we move into, kind of my favorite topic area, which is our pollinator work, specifically working on native bees. And that's the program that we talked a lot about called the Tamalpais Bee Lab. And that work has really been an evolution, really, I think, taking us through kind of the inception with like citizen science and really moving into more of community science. And I say that intentionally because the work that was originally done here in 2017, 2018 came from the agencies being really interested in, what is our vegetation work? What is kind of our invasive management work with weeds and stuff like that? How is that impacting pollinators? And so the collaborative partnered with Dr. Gretchen Laboon to design an inventory, the first ever standardized inventory of native bees in Marin County public lands. And that's kind of a traditional way of doing citizen science is, the scientists get an idea and they're like, wow, we need to get this idea. We're going to implement a protocol, and then we're going to figure out how to engage the public in accomplishing that protocol or, working through the data in that way. It's kind of that top down. We did that very, very successfully. We completed basically a 5-year inventory of all of those public lands to get a both historical and a current species list. And the way that community scientists or citizen and community scientists engaged in that work was they would help us process the specimens that we collected. So, sorting the bees from the not bees, curating them all, pinning them up so that eventually they could be identified by the experts at the USDA Pollinating Insects Research Unit. So, and the way that kind of engagement happened was pulling from an already dedicated base of volunteers because, our organization, as I mentioned, with the Golden Gate Raptors already has kind of a big cohort of volunteers that we can already pull from. Each of the agencies already had a cohort of volunteers we could pull from. And so really it's this dedication to the place that drew people in. People care about the lands that we work in. They already engaged with the agencies that were there. And then we could come in and be like, hey, we're doing this really amazing, cool project to fill a data gap that is going to help inform management. And folks, you provide an amazing opportunity and folks show up, and oftentimes I would ask people at these events being like, how'd you find us? Were you interested in bees before? Some people do. They're like, I just searched out any potential bee thing and I found this one and it's so exciting. And then other folks are like, no, like I wanted to give to these parklands. And I just kind of started searching out these things. And this was one of the few opportunities I saw that engaged with the land in a different way than kind of our traditional idea of stewardship, which is more on the restoration side of things. Maybe you're removing weedy species, maybe you're planting plants, maybe you're helping with beach cleanups, things like that, which are vitally important in the stewardship of our land. But also folks, they recognize that there's different ways to contribute that might actually align with some of their own goals for developing their technical skills, their general kind of scientific interests, because to me, that's kind of the excitement of citizen community science is, yes, the volunteers provide us with a type of service. They're helping us process data, they're helping us put out reports and various things, but we are also investing back in them. It's like we are helping them develop skills to identify bees, to sort them out from each other, to engage with the lands in kind of a different way, so that the hope is that they will take those skills and apply that scientific agency to their everyday lives, whatever that might be. So I'm like,
I love that. It's great. And I guess what you started with is you said that was a bit of a transformation. It started with,
yes.
And tell us what it looks like now.
Yes. So that's kind of where the evolution more into community science has happened. And that conversation of like, how do we invest back into the volunteers who are also coming to us? And what I heard a lot of from, our over 150 volunteers was, wow, I would love to like be able to go out in the field and learn how to observe bees. I would love to be able to, one of the most common questions I got was like, how do you tell this bee from that bee? And I was like, well, for the most part, I learned in the field. I learned from, the UC Berkeley Urban Bee Lab by being out there watching bees on flowers. So most of the ways that I identify bees is in relation to their floral hosts, or their behaviors, or, where they are in the landscape and when. And that allowed us to kind of expand out and be like, okay, what kind of technical skills and knowledge do our volunteers want to know? And then what do the agencies want to know so that they can inform management? And then what are potential frameworks that we can utilize to accomplish both of those goals? And so taking all of that knowledge and tooling around with it, we developed the next iteration of the Bee Lab, which is much more field-based and is much more about contributing our localized data into broader efforts to understand native bee populations. Because, as you know, I'm sure from your many wonderful guests, our bees are very good at being, highly localized. They really find their little niche in the environment. So we actually do need people at these like small landscape levels collecting rigorous data that can then feed into larger efforts. I know that's happening with the native bee monitoring network, the all the atlas work, the wonderful work you're all doing at the Oregon Bee Atlas and various things. So what we have now embarked on is we do three different components of our program. So one is we host local surveys for the California Bumblebee Atlas. And so we worked with our partners, our One Tam partners, to identify areas of interest for them, whether in a land management purpose, whether in a uniqueness of a landscape or a habitat. We have a lot of unique habitats on Mount Tamalpais, or whether these are areas that are just high visitation areas that would benefit from people kind of understanding what is happening in these landscapes they visit, very frequently. And what we do is we provide kind of a set container of this is an area of interest for the agencies. This is also a little bit of a workshop and a training for you, because the Bumblebee Atlas does an amazing job setting folks up to go out and conduct surveys on their own. Yeah. But I have often found that sometimes folks need a little bit of confidence boosting to really feel like they can set out and go and do this on their own in BLM lands or state parks lands or whatever that might be. Because, as a field biologist, I take for granted that I feel very comfortable implementing protocols on my own, setting up a field day, going out and doing all those things. But sometimes folks, it's like, they just need a little bit of assurance and a little bit of guidance that, no, you got this, you can do the protocol, you can plan a field day, you can do all of this work, you really can. But they just need a mentor. So that's also one of the roles we serve is getting folks set up so that they can eventually go and be an independent community scientist to contribute to any potential bee community science effort that is out there. So that's one component, is we do host regular surveys for the Bumblebee Atlas using the Xerces protocol, submitting the data into their database. And then we also get some information for the land managers around, this group of bees that is of great concern because of all the threats facing it. They're charismatic, obviously. And there's already this wonderful infrastructure from the Xerces Society and various other organizations, that we can lean on, their expertise and their infrastructure to really set our local volunteers up for success. The next component is looking into the 70% of our native bees, at least in California, that nest directly in the ground. You will see continuously in reviews and from all of the experts out there that one of the biggest data gaps for our native bees is nesting, and ground nesting in particular. So the Cornell University, the Danforth Lab, has begun a project, the Ground Nesting Bee Survey Project, using everyone's, or maybe I'm being overly prescriptive there, but most people I know's favorite community science platform, iNaturalist, that to basically just harness those opportunistic ground nesting observations that we find. So with that, we, in tangent to our Bumblebee Atlas surveys, we also do a certain amount of kind of curated exploration for ground nesting bees. And with this one, it's a little less structured. There's not exactly a protocol, but what we often find that we are doing with folks is just sharing information about, how do bees find nest? Where might bees be nesting? Kind of like thinking like a bee, to hone those naturalist skills so that anytime folks are out on a hike or opportunistically see a ground nest of a native bee, that you can contribute to this like very important critical ecological data. So that, again, is using, kind of this expansive, wonderful infrastructure provided by iNaturalist and the Danforth Lab. And we are, again, contributing that local data to these broader national efforts.
We had a podcast on GNB's initiative, and what was wonderful about it is a volunteer may make an observation, but there's a really good connection with the lab in Cornell with follow-up questions. And I imagine for those volunteers who are gaining their independence, being able to be reached out from one of the premier bee labs on the planet and ask for, could you take a soil sample, or could you make some additional observations must be so exciting for them and empowering.
Yes, I think you said that very eloquently. I find that a lot of times folks have a hard time feeling confidence again in that identity of like, I can collect, like rigorous, amazing scientific data, and being outreached to from, some of the like preeminent bee experts out there really does validate them. And they're like, wait a minute, I can do this. I can do it. And, I would sit there and be like you had it in all along, you don't need that extra validation. But I think particularly, science hasn't always been accessible to all folks, and some areas of science and academia have kind of put them on a pedestal that most people feel like, it's hard to get that step up onto that pedestal. So particularly when folks within, who have been perhaps placed on that pedestal through no fault of their own, make that effort to reach across and to engage with those folks. It goes a long way in building that scientific agency. And I know from our volunteers, that's something we think a lot about in terms of like volunteer appreciation and recognition. And they often tell us, it's like being able to have access to expertise and some of these specialists often means a lot more to them because, it's been prohibitive. If you're not already on a set track in terms of your education or profession, you might never have a chance to interact with these folks. So I think it's just one of those things that it's like, sometimes there's barriers that we don't even realize are put in place there just because of circumstances and situations. And that's where these types of efforts and platforms like iNaturalist have really started to break those down. It's kind of amazing that you could message John Asher or Zach Portman or somebody on iNaturalist and potentially get an exchange going. And who knows where that can set you off on, it's like maybe you're going to be the one who notices this one thing. And the next thing you know, you're going to be in, John Asher's next paper of, the distribution of bees, all over the world because you discovered something new. I mean, that's really amazing.
It is amazing. But you did say 3. We're at 2. What's the third one?
Yes. I apologize. I get very excited talking about it.
As you should. It's amazing. It's remarkable.
Yes. And so the third aspect of or component of this program, which is probably what I'm most excited about, and perhaps folks have heard about it, was something we were calling the San Francisco Bay Area Leafcutter Bee Search Party. And if you've ever wondered why most bees don't have common names, that might give you a little snippet. That mouthful of a name essentially is a way to describe an effort that we wanted to undertake with community science volunteers to see if we could redetect a species of bee that is, as far as we know, is endemic to kind of the northern part of the Bay Area within Marin, San Francisco, and Napa counties. And
endemic meaning only found there.
Yes. As far as we know, I'm still waiting on a few museum records that need to be cleaned up. But yes, as far as we know, only exists within kind of this like greater Bay Area. And the last time we have record of it is from and the last record in Marin County was from 1977. And so this species, the scientific name is Trachusa gummifera, which I will probably use more than the common name just because it's pithier and it's fun to say. But this is a species that is actually designated by the California Department of Fish and Wildlife as a species of greatest conservation need, which means it doesn't have a federal or state listing, but it is a species that is potentially threatened because of its really restricted range. If it only persists in one area, even if it might be abundant in that area, just the pressures that could come in from the outside, climate change, development, those things could threaten it. So it's a way to designate like we should be concerned about this species, even if there aren't any kind of federal or state mandates that should.
Okay. So this is a real challenge. If volunteers could find this very rare bee, that would be a real testament to their sleuthing capacity.
Yes, I would say so. And it would, because we had no records of it since 1980, even though it's been in our most recent state wildlife action plan, one has to sit there and wonder, are we not seeing it because it is gone? Have people been out there looking, or has just no one been able to dedicate the time to go out and look for it.
Uh-huh.
That is always a question, is like, is this uh lack of a species detection because of effort, or is it because it's actually gone? And until you make that effort, you can't really say one way or another. And so this is another one where, because there were no mandates, there were no federal, no state, no local mandates to go out and look for this thing. All of the, agency scientists, they get mandates to look at other things that have more pressing requirements, or are, kind of at the forefront of our minds within climate change, forest health, various those things. But, this was a species that was missing from our 2017, 2018 inventory. It's a species that the experts at the USDA were like, you should go out and see if you can find this bee, because it is so unique and it's only known to here. And it's interesting that it didn't show up in your inventory. And so with that, I was like, wow, wouldn't it be amazing if we could go out, do some transect walks, do some observations, mentor volunteers on, what are the evidences of leafcutter bees? What are kind of the evidence you might find a Trachusa collecting resin for its nest? Where might it be collecting leaves from? Can you actually just see it on flowers? And so we had designed a whole program where we were going to go out with groups of, a little bit more specialized trained volunteers, but to essentially survey all of these historical locations where Trachusa gummifera was found within Marin landscapes. We were very, very excited about that. However, in May, like any good volunteer manager, I was out doing some site visits, because don't ever take volunteers to a site you haven't visited before. Just asking for something to go awry. And I had done a bunch of research from, combing the historical record of like, okay, where was this bee previously? Do we know anything about the floral hosts? We only have one floral host on record. It was the chaparral pea, Thuringia montana. So I kind of, we were in the historical location. I was kind of trying to get a sense of like, okay, we can put a volunteer here. We can put a volunteer here. How long are we going to have them like do observations for? The next thing you know, I see a bee zip by me. And I went,
there it is.
I was like, it can't be. It's got to be something else. It's another leg. It's an anthophora. No way. No way. And so I'm sitting there and I've got my net out and I'm okay. I'm like waiting for this bee to zip by again. Zips by. I get it in my net. I put it in a nice sterilized vial and put it in my cooler to cool it down. And, I was like, okay, cool, whatever, it'll be fine. And then I pulled the bee out about 15 minutes later to take photos of it. And I went, oh my gosh. And I was like, a little like, I think this is the bee. And I called over all the staff and I was like, I think we have the bee. And sure enough, I got back and I sent off those photos to the USDA. And the next day they confirmed that we had found a male Trachusa gummifera.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
That's amazing. That is simply amazing.
Yeah, it was pretty spectacular. And I will admit that some folks have told me that storing needs to be zhuzhed up a little bit. They're like, it's not a very good story, Sarah. You did a bunch of research. You went out there and you found this bee. And I was like, I think that's an amazing story. I think that is, while community scientists did not make this initial discovery, without the idea of it, without the promise of it, we would never have been out there in the first place. It would have been just another species in a report somewhere that was like, hey, you should look at this. And, we would have gone, yes, we should look at that. We absolutely should. But like, how are we going to dedicate the time, the resources needed to go out there? And so to me, I think that it's so promising and so hopeful. How many other species are out there that, we think might be missing from the landscape or haven't been seen in decades? But, it's like, if we get, kind of the right group of interested folks trained up, like who knows what else we might be detecting out there? We might be able to bring back a lot of hope for these species that we think might be in trouble or might be threatened in this way. And so, so it's one of these things. And now we're starting to, kind of think about, where does this work and this research into this species, it's like, where is this going to move into the future? And for us, a critical component of that is community science, because all the factors are still the same, even though we've redetected this bee species. The biologists are still limited in their time. There's still certain mandates. Yes, it's identified in the state wildlife action plan, but there's no real set, like, okay, you've rediscovered a species. What do you do now? So this is where it's very exciting. And I think, yeah, this kind of for us is a beautiful precedent for like, where can community science help fill the data gaps that scientists can't do, as well as bring some hope and engage people in that kind of hopeful exploration that's out there.
Well, that's an amazing story, remarkable story, and it kind of brings me to how I wanted to conclude the interview. Is, we started with this, we have these lands and we have professionals, but these gaps. And I guess now there's this experience over years, these three kind of components. And I wondered how you think it's changed the landscape, how the agencies and municipalities now look at citizen science and community science, how it might be opening up new frontiers for that kind of work. What do you think of that?
Oh, that's such a wonderful question. And again, I just feel like, I can't speak about kind of the future of community sense and science without recognizing everything that came before. I think everything the Xerxes Society is doing with their bumblebee atlases is really helping inform policy, and agencies are recognizing that critical component, and just what we can do without it. I know I just love everything y'all are doing with the Master Meltologist program. I think it's really amazing. I think just the veracity of the data and the sheer amount of data that you're able to accomplish there. So I just, it's like, I think there's already been a shifting in the perception of just the value of citizen community science, and not just the value, but kind of the critical importance of it. This work with Trachusa gummifera is really inspiring agencies to look at these other data gaps and be like, wait a minute, these don't have to just stay as data gaps. This could become something we learn more about through community science. This is going to be critical in filling data gaps. I honestly don't know how we do it without this. There's too many species out there that need attention, and there are limited professional scientists who can do that work. If we pulled together all of the agency scientists, all the consultants, all those, we still wouldn't have enough people to look at, we're outnumbered here in terms of biodiversity and all of those things. I mean, in California alone, we have 1,600 species of native bees, and most of those we don't know a lot about. And I sit here and I'm like, even myself, I could spend the rest of my life studying Trachusa gummifera and filling some wonderful data gaps, and that would still leave, 1,599 other bees that need attention and something to look at. And that's just one group of organisms, let alone the butterflies, the beetles, the weevils, the slime molds, the birds, all of these things. So I think there's an ever growing recognition that, community science and citizen science is not just kind of a bonus thing. It's not just kind of like, oh, we do it if it's great. I think that people are like, no, this is how we are going to get this work done, and because people are out there and people care, people want to learn and they want to contribute and they want to, be able to develop their scientific agency so that they can help. There's a lot of messaging out there right now of like, well, we just don't know enough. Or, it's like these heavy topics around climate change and human developments and stuff like that. And so this is a way that people can feel like that they can contribute and move the dial on our knowledge so that we can, do better in terms of a conservation, a stewardship, and, overall like caring for the world and the non-human organisms that live in it type of way.
I've run into so many people who have become authorities just by their curiosity. They're not getting a paycheck. They're not mandated by but they just by their sheer curiosity and observational skills, they're the people I go to now if I need information. They really have, there's something about natural history, and it's kind of, you can never get to the bottom of it, that just becomes like something that can really enrich your life. And it really has, the programming that you've developed has clearly shown the outer edges of this and how far it can go. It's a really remarkable. I'm so glad we were able to have you on today to talk about it.
Yeah, thanks so much. And, y'all are doing amazing work too. I think, I got to hang out with a number of your master melitologists at the bee course.
Aren't they smart people?
They're amazing.
Yeesh.
I mean, blowing us out of the water. I sit there and I'm like, you're doing this all on your own. That is immensely impressive. And I think just a testament to everyone is a scientist. You might just need a little bit of coaching and a little bit of mentorship. But there you go. And just imagine what we could do if everyone viewed themselves as a scientist who can contribute something. I just feel like our depth of knowledge and where we could go in the world would just be, it blows my mind. So
I'm turning that into a t-shirt. That's well said. Thank you so much. And thanks again for taking the time. I know running volunteer programs is a taxing job. Thanks for taking some time to talk with us.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Thank you so much for listening. Show notes with links from each episode are available at the website pollinationpodcast.oregonstate.edu. I also love hearing from you, and there's a form at the website where you can pop in and say hello and give me feedback. If you want to support the show, remember to leave a rating on iTunes, Spotify, or whatever podcast mothership you use. And finally, if you have the means and you want to help support my lab's effort to document bee biodiversity in Oregon, visit OregonBeeAtlas.org and follow down to the donate button where you can make a tax-deductible donation to the Jerry and Judith Paul Native Pollinator Endowment. Every little bit helps. See you next episode.